So when do we think this is going to happen? This week or next week? We don't know exactly when the revolution will, take place completely. I know one thing. In this past year, something significant has happened. I cannot describe it totally and completely, but I think you know it, you understand it, and you feel it in your bones that something different has happened. So regardless, we are going to restore the American dream. We are going to restore our Constitution. This is not a brand new, violent type of revolution. This is a revolution, a continuation of a revolution that was a grand revolution, the best revolution ever. Because it was one of the very few times, if not the only time in all of history, where there was a violent revolution and the people ended up with more freedom rather than less. A lot of times we'll be accused of going backwards, back to the old days, and if you think that you believe in backing up your currency, that's supposed to be an ancient idea, and that we're not modern enough. But you know what is ancient? Is tyranny.
Yeah!
Too much of it. That is ancient, that's been around, and we've only had a small taste of what freedom is all about. And we've had that, and we have been blessed to live in this country. We still have a lot of our freedoms left and a lot of our prosperity. But what we're sensing as a people now is there's something wrong with the foundation, and we're afraid it's going to crash in and cave in on us if the foundation is not there. If the rule of law is gone, if the soundness to our currency is gone, how can we remain a strong and vibrant nation? It's not possible. So those people who are saying, don't touch us, don't rock the boat, are the ones who are hoping it won't fall apart, and they're in denial. But those of us who recognize this realize that something has to be done, and we don't want to wait until it's too late.
Right.
Because when you have an economic crisis that comes from too much spending and too much inflation, it leads to a political crisis. And it can be avoided if we do these things. We have the great traditions to look at. And freedom really does work. We've got to have confidence that freedom works. We get frequent questions. Even tonight I was asked, well, do people have a right to a home? Do people have a right to medical care or a right to education? In a free society, no, you don't. You have a right to your life. You have a right to your liberty. You have a right to pursue your happiness. Some people would come back and say, well, that's cold and heartless. But it isn't. It's humanitarian. If you look at all of history, the people who have thrived the most, where there has been the least amount of poverty and the least amount of famine, it came about by the maximum amount of freedom. So the less freedom we have, the more poverty we're going to have. And that's what we're seeing, the shift from great wealth and prosperity for the middle class to a poorer middle class, because we haven't had the full faith and confidence in freedom. The other grand thing about freedom is it brings people together. It brings diverse people together because they're not interested in what you do with your life as long as you lead your own life as you choose and that you don't bother other people. So it brings people together. Today we have a system that does exactly the opposite. Welfarism and socialism divides us because the country, what happens is the country, as it gets poorer, and when the government controls the wealth, we have to go to Washington to try to get some of our money back. And yet the money is being squandered. The money really isn't there anymore. The Social Security fund is empty. So therefore, people are clawing each other. So the business people, the big, the influential groups, they just hire more lobbyists to get more out. And then the little people lose on this. So it's very, very divisive. But freedom really does bring people together. And this is the reason that I am so pleased when we have our rallies and our supporters, when you come together, that it's people that have been Republicans, that are Republicans, that used to be Republicans, independents who always were independents, Democrats that have been disenchanted, people from the Constitutional Party, people from the Libertarian Party, even people from the Green Party. They come and they join us because they know that we can come together and sort this out. The Constitution should unify us, and that's what it can do. We have every... If we understand where our freedoms come from, we can understand this system so clearly, because our freedoms don't come from our government. Our freedoms come from our Creator. We are born with our right to our life and our right to our liberty. The government is to be very restricted into protecting those freedoms. The Constitution is very clear. it's a document that is basically thou shalt nots. Whatever government can do, except in these very few narrow areas, the government's allowed to do it. And then, if that is the federal government. If you want more government, and you want it at the local level, if you want your state government to run your schools or your local community to run the school, under our Constitution, that's who's supposed to make the decisions, not the federal government. We don't need the federal government running our schools. I don't think we need it at all. You know, one thing that you can decide why socialism and welfareism and big government is incompatible with freedom for so many of them. If we live in a free society and we allow people to lead their lives as they choose, if a certain enclave, if a family or a big community, if they say, we want a socialist community, we want to go over there and we want to bring things together and take care of things and be a collective. In a free society, you're allowed to do that. But in a socialist society, a welfare society, the system that we have today, will they allow us to go off on our own and say that we want to take care of ourselves and not have taxes and inflated currency? No, they reject that. This is the reason that people in a free society allows, you know, socialism to exist voluntarily and freedom to exist side by side. But once you capitulate and you allow the government to take over and run things, then it becomes incompatible with freedom. Once we decide our government should be involved in trying to make us better people and make us more virtuous and have a fairer distribution of the economy, the only way they can do that is to undermine our liberties. They may be good goals, but they always have bad results. People have to take care of themselves. Freedom does mean that you have to have a fair amount of toleration, because some people abuse their freedoms. And they can, and if they only abuse it and they injure themselves, we will survive quite well. But if they abuse their neighbor's freedom, that is a different story. And that is when the government has to be involved. But we have to have the confidence that people will take care of themselves and that they will develop self-reliance. And the reason why this message is resounding so clearly now is people have given up on the government taking care of us. They don't do a very good job. Matter of fact, they're a failure at it, and that's why we need something different. Probably one of the best examples of a recent failure occurred a couple of years ago, you know, during the hurricane, and a major city got wiped out. And so what happened, the feds went down there to take care of everything. What was the first thing they did? They took away the guns from the people who owned the property, and they wouldn't be allowing the people to come back in. And then they bought a lot of trailers for people to live in the trailers that were unusable. They were never able to use them. Then they decided, well, there are poor people and they can't eat, so we're going to pass out $2,000 to everybody. And lo and behold, the lines got longer and longer, and people came from hither and yon, even from out of the state, and they got in line. And then it was discovered that they gave a lot of dollars out to the wrong people, and you know what? They sent out a letter. They said, bring that money back and return it to the government. Then they wonder why we think government doesn't work very well. Central economic is a failure. That's part of socialism. Local activity is what we need. In 1900, the worst natural disaster that we ever had happened in where I live, in my district, and that's in Galveston, Texas. 6,000 people or more were killed. There was no FEMA, no Department of Homeland Security. The city was raised 6 foot. They built a seawall down there, and the city still stands and has endured hurricanes for over 100 years, and there was no federal money. So it isn't like it won't happen. People today, I think somebody asked me, well, what would you do if there's a hurricane? How's the government going to take care of them? Well, there would be more money in the district. There's more money. People say, well, if you don't have a Department of Education, how are you going to get money for the schools? Well, there'd be more money for the schools because it would be in your pockets or in your state. This whole idea that if you hire a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington that they're going to take care of it just doesn't work. So. So what we need is the restoration of a strong America. Strong beliefs in what made America great. Strong belief in freedom. A strong belief in the conviction that you need a sound currency. A strong belief and conviction that a military is very important, but you don't have a stronger military by draining the military or not taking care of the veterans. That does not give us strength. What we need to do is know what we stand for and set a good example. That's what our strength should be used for. And that's what we should have in a president. A president understands this, who's willing to fight and stand for these principles so that America can once again become the great nation it once was. Thank you very much.